Hey, shalom, shalom. It's the brother Abai Buff in the DC Church coming at you, giving all praise, glory, and honor to Yahweh Shema Shah, Bashim Kakadash, Yahweh in the Heavenly Father, Yahweh Shah, in whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, Bashim in the name, Rekomini Spirit, Kodash, the Holy. These are the names and the powers that I come to you in order to profess the 100% truth, and Lord's will seal the elect's fate. Shanya Kabaga, while Rakaza Koyin Abba Ith, meaning the double honors to the elders and apostles of GMS in these times, whom the Heavenly Father had enlisted the 100% truth to. And Shalom, wa Barakum, wa Barakar, and Shea Allah, peace and blessings be upon the elect, our nation Israel, and to the men out there that's pushing this word of sincerity and the truth to you. I say Shalom, wa Barakum, wa Thumb, peace and blessings be upon you. Now, without further ado, I got a quick video. It's not really a quick video, but, a semi-quick video, which this is an important factor of belief, of our history, of our heritage, and of our lineage. And it is crucial to go over this portion of history in order to build your understanding on the concept of what a Gentile is and what a Gentile is also referenced as in the New Testament, okay? Now, hold on, let me make sure I'm good. All right, cool. So the reason why this is important is because there's a lot of conflict and there's a lot of confusion wrapped around the word Gentile, and this is a word that Christians will use, and just other denominations in general, we use to try to justify salvation to the other nations because they don't have the correct understanding regarding the word Gentile, okay? And it's okay, because the thing is, the fact of the matter is that the Heavenly Father is not out for numbers. He's out for the elect. And these individuals who misconstrue the word Gentile, it's very simple. It's a very simple concept that's just overlooked due to negligence, ignorance, or miseducation. But the scriptures talk about how if you have ears to hear, you're going to hear these parables. If you have eyes to see, you're going to be able to see the truth within the Bible and within historical events that took place, okay? Now, Paul is an individual who is primarily responsible for a lot of the books in the New Testament, and you got to understand the setting of what's going on for you to be able to acquire the context behind why Paul is saying the things that he's saying. So, the name of this video is How Grecian Dominion Influenced the Concept of a Gentile. And basically, we're going to go over some of the details behind that. Now, I started with ChatGPT, and I posed a question. I said, why was there a big dispute between Jews that kept their customs and Jews that conformed to the king's profane laws during the Maccabees? And did this gripe carry on into the Roman Empire for the Jews? Now, the reason why I said that is because it's important to understand that each portion of history affected the next portion of history entirely, okay? And Salakia for all the sounds in the background. There's some trucks going by, but I'm on a walk right now, and I felt influenced to make this video, so, I pushed the red button, right? Anyway, excuse that. So when it answered the question, it basically said, yes, what you're describing is a real important internal Jewish conflict during the Maccabean period, and some of its underlying tensions continued into the Roman period. Now, we can really stop there, but there's more details to overlay, or to really kind of to go over, so that you can have a better understanding regarding what the concept of a Gentile is when it's referenced to Israel in the New Testament, right? So before we move forward, give me 1 second. Before we move forward, let me look this precept up. I think it's Matthew chapter 18. I knew it was 18. There's a book of Matthew chapter 18, verse 17. And again, I got two phones, so I'm reading off my other phone. So, bear with that. If you want to follow along, you can grab the precept. Maybe I should just do this then. Okay. This is the book of Matthew chapter 18, verse 17. Now, real quick, it goes to say, it says, and if he shall neglect to hear them, it says, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. All right. So negligence and following the law, statutes, and commandments, or hearing the church and adhering to the words of Yahweh Shema Shai, cause you to be referenced as quote unquote a heathen man. Okay, so negligence and following the ways of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, all right, or the ways of our fathers, the laws of our fathers, right, would classify you as what would be called a heathen man, aka Gentile. Now, real quick, and I gotta come back to this. It's a lot. Real quick, I want to see something. Neglect. All right. We're gonna go to that word and the heathen man.
G 1482. Ethnikos.
Ethnikos, right? It says, adapted to the genius or customs of a people, particular to a people, national. It says, suited to the manners of language of foreigners, strange or foreign. All right. So another word for heathen is again Gentile, as you should know. All right. So continuing, it says, what caused the original dispute? The crisis began under Antiochus IV Epiphanes IV, right? It says the Seleucid king in the 2nd century BCE. Antiochus attempted to impose Hellenistic practices on Judea. This wasn't a simple matter of Jews adopting Greek clothing or speaking Greek. His policies eventually included restrictions on Jewish religion, which, Jewish, but and I'm gonna speak loosely. I'm just reading the context of what's being said, which, you can fill in the blanks. We're talking about Israel, right? So it says Jewish religion practices and the profanation of the temple in Jerusalem. And again, you had individuals who were cool with doing that, i.e. the 2/3, or individuals who are just not chosen of the Most High, because technically it won't know 2/3 back then. And the concept of, what a 2/3 is going to be in modern day. But there were individuals that were just rebellious against the Heavenly Father who are reincarnated and are going to be a part of the 2/3, which the 2/3 are referencing, I believe it's Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8. Again, don't quote me on that. But this ain't about that. This is about the concept of what's being built, right? So it says, but there was already a Jewish cultural divide before the persecution, right? Some Jews were enthusiastic about Hellenistic culture and wanted Judea to resemble the surrounding Greek-speaking world, just like you have today, where you have individuals who have fully become American, the white picket fence, the wife and kids, the monogamous relationship with the wife and kids, with the dog, and again, the white picket fence, Prius and all that. They conform to this world, right? And then it says, others believe that adopting Greek customs threatened the conventional identity of Israel, right? Because in this world, they say it's okay for you to be homosexual. They say it's okay for you to eat things that are profane to Yahweh Shema Shai. They say that, and also in this world, there isn't a, what's the word I'm looking for? There isn't any repercussions for essentially breaking the laws of the Most High. So there's no possible way you could be an American and also be an Israelite at the same time, because the laws conflict each other. there's no penalty for adultery, right? And then also within that concept, even in the concept of marriage, you know, the way that they allow a woman to acquire all of a man's hard work and goods after having severed from a marriage, which a woman can't technically initiate a marriage. And if she does initiate, not marriage, divorce. And if she does initiate a divorce, she can't go out here, divorce a man, and then go be with another man. Okay? So anyway, it says that the book of First Maccabees describes Jews who forsook the Holy Covenant and embraced Hellenistic practices. The conflict, therefore, became partly a question of how can a Jew adapt to the surrounding culture without ceasing to be faithful to the Torah, right? And it says, number 2, it wasn't simply Jews versus Greeks. This was especially important, an important point. This is especially an important point. It says the Maccabean revolt wasn't merely Jewish people versus the foreign king. There was also Jewish traditionalists versus Jewish Hellenizers, right? So you had individuals who were strict about the law, okay? Because at that time, they were able to practice it to the best of their ability, especially a lot more than we're able to practice it now. You didn't have whores, you didn't have social media. You had more of a sacred way of living because it was promoted during that time due to the advancement of technology and other practical things that Satan utilizes now to make the world more wicked, right? And then on top of that, we also had partial admission from the king to be able to practice our laws, right? But then you had individuals, and it got to the point to where we couldn't anymore because Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he wanted us to conform at all costs. He said, you got to everybody leave your laws and be conformed to the laws of the Greeks, just like they did during the Babylonian time and Nebuchadnezzar. Everybody got to be bowed down to the statue. So in other words, this was another statue, metaphorically, that Israel had to bow down to, where you had Jake that was like, you had, again, Israel, we could say Jew traditionalists who were just not about that shit. And then you had individuals who were Hellenized that were okay with being conformative to the king's laws. And then the king's laws were in contrast to the laws of Yahweh Shema Shai. And again, this is where this divide happened. But there's a little bit more complexities to this story too. When we're going to read a little bit deeper, it says some Jews actively supported or cooperated with the Seleucid program. Others resisted it violently. Okay, and it says the Hasmonean/Maccabean revolt began around 167 BCE. Therefore, had both an anti-imperial and an internal religious dimension. Right. It says the family of Mattathias and his sons, including Judas Maccabees, became the leaders of the resistance, okay, which is also detailed in the book of First Maccabees, right? It says, why would other Jews accept the king's policies? This is where it gets complicated, okay? So you had individuals who legitimately did not see a problem with profaning the temple. And then you had individuals who was not having that shit, okay? And the individuals who weren't having that shit kept that because, again, it came with its extremities. They had to be out in the wilderness. They had to fight wars. You know, there was a lot of victory that came from through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shai from the individuals who did not conform to the king's Hellenization at that time, right? So you had individuals, and again, that gripe, because you can see the compassion within, one example was when Mattathias gave his speech, and you had an individual who was coming to the temple to sacrifice swine. And then Mattathias, he killed that dude and all the guards that came to him from the king during that time, and then they fled, right? So you had individuals who were on the higher extremity of being, revolting, okay, against the king and his laws. So with all this being said, I want you to keep in mind, you know, at a halfway point, we're at a halfway point, but I want you to keep in mind the Matthews 18:7. So again, if you are not taking admonishment from the church, and if you are essentially not being a follower of Yahweh Shema Shai, you are considerably a heathen man, okay? But also, a Hellenized Jew would also be, in turns, referenced as a Gentile, okay? Because, again, what came with the Hellenization, which is also going to detail in a little bit, is the change of dietary laws, practical laws, social laws, or rules, essentially, or constructs of what a man would follow, sexual laws, okay? So being Hellenized took you away from the concept of what creates a Jew, or what separates a Jew from the rest of the people, okay, or the rest of this world, for that matter. So when you become Hellenized, you become a common man, or a foreigner to your own essential, you can really say heritage, okay? Now, again, this doesn't make you a foreigner to your ethnicity. It makes you a foreigner to your customs that sever you from the rest of the nations, okay? Now, I'm gonna keep reading. It says, this is where it gets complicated. Hellenized Jews weren't necessarily saying, I hate Judaism. Many probably thought that practicing in Greek culture was perfectly compatible with being Jewish, which it wasn't, right? Even today, there are things that we can participate in, but there are a lot of things that we can't participate in and that we won't participate in that are just strictly against Yahweh Shema Shai. That's a part of quote unquote American culture. So, it says Jerusalem was increasingly integrated into the wider Hellenistic world. Greek language, education, philosophy, political institutions, and it says social customs were influential throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, right? So another thing that's a part of American culture, just like how it was for Greece, or during the time or the Seleucid Empire, is the holidays, right? The festivals. Okay, during the time in Greece, you would have individuals, and I think also carried over into Rome, with the concept of gymnasium came in, where you had individuals who would be, you know, working out naked, butt booty naked. Okay, and again, you had Jews who participated in this and thought it was perfectly compatible with their customs, which is actually not, because you're not supposed to see the nakedness of another man. By law, right? So, and you know, it's funny, like the reasons why the Heavenly Father tells us things is because when you do things that are adverse to the law, there are spirits that attach itself to you that are adverse to having peace within following the law. So I hope that makes sense. You know, I don't want to go deeper into that. So anyway, some Jews apparently saw traditional restrictions as holding them back socially and politically. So your Floyd Mayweathers, your Jay-Z's, your Kanye West's, your politicians, your Don Lemons, these individuals, they're okay with becoming an American or full-on American or rising in the Babylonian world in order for them to gain social and political power, right? So it's the same thing that happens. It's just reincarnated into another empire. It's reincarnated into another, captivity. Where we at? It says others, however, regarded practices such as circumcision, Sabbath observance, dietary laws, and temple worship as essential markers of Israel's covenant with the Most High, which these are. And these are things that are supposed to be followed to the best of your ability. Now, again, some of these things may be compromised because of where we are environmentally, But at the same time, it doesn't diminish the fact that we are still responsible of doing our part, which following it to the best of our abilities. Now, in this position, they were completely compromised because the king made them essentially flip over everything. And that's part of the reason why you had revolutionaries like our forefathers, Judas Maccabees and his sons, that just weren't having it, right? It says, so the argument wasn't merely about customs, it was about what made someone authentically Jew, okay? And again, what really makes you an Israelite, oh man, see, this brings up so much points, because then what really makes you the Israel of the Most High is your faith in the Most High, Yahweh Shema Shai. And faith will compel you not to conform to the ideals of this world, okay? Now, give me 1 second. One second. That's Walker's P. It's called to wild, but I think Galatians 6 and 16 really. But there was a differentiation in Israel. And you also had Paul who said, you know, not all them that are of Israel are Israel. You know, and that's what Christians like to use to say, oh, see, that means that some of the people that are considered Israelites aren't ethnically attached to the identity of an Israelite, which that's not what the fuck it means, bro. Anyway, and it says, and yes, the argument continued under Rome, which is the main point, which is one of the main points, because really practically everything that's said in the New Testament is covered under Rome, or that captivity when we're under Rome, right? So the reason why this is important is because that time frame of what happened during when we were under the Seleucid Empire affected the storyline and impacted the storyline when it pertains to language, when it pertains to the controversies, and also it gives more context to why certain things were said and the way that it was said and the way that things were spoken of in the New Testament. Because we were dealing with the conflict of what came previously from being under Grecian customs, okay? Or Grecian dominion. So it says, but the Roman period disputes wasn't simply the same conflict repeating itself. By the 1st century BCE and 1st century CE, Judea had developed a much more complicated spectrum of Jewish identity, okay? Because now you had different compartmentalizations, if that is a proper term, or compartmentalized sects of believers of Yahweh Shema Shai, right? So it says you had groups such as the Pharisees, strongly concerned with Torah and its interpretation in everyday life. Sadducees, associated particularly with the temple priesthood and aristocracy. Enosis, which I'm not sure how to say that word. Separatist groups emphasizing extreme religious purity. Zealot-type revolutionaries who opposed Roman dominion and, in some cases, believed resistance was religiously obligatory. Now, and again, zealots were basically trying to carry the same baton that we had during the time of the Grecian Empire, but the Lord allowed, you know, I believe it was Herod at that time. Nevertheless, he allowed Rome to allow Israel to be able to express themselves more religiously, quote unquote, so that we wouldn't have to have revolts, you know. It wasn't really necessarily a need to do that because we were able to already express ourselves religiously, but then, you know, with limitations. Now, again, it's kind of the same thing right now. Like, again, i.e. Rome all over again, but it's kind of the same. We're kind of under the same kind of like situation, because we're able to express ourselves religiously and go out here and speak on our religion, and Esau hasn't touched us yet. But there is going to come a point in time to where, you know, that barrier is going to be broken. Nevertheless, you know, that goes into a deeper portion of prophecy. But anyhow, sticking with the historical factor of what happened, or the types of Israelite groups that you had zealot type revolutionaries who opposed Roman dominion, and in some cases believed resistance was religiously obligatory. And then it says, Jews who were culturally comfortable with the wider Greco-Roman world while remaining quote unquote Jewish, right? It says ordinary Jews who practices fell somewhere between these extremes, and there were major disagreements about what faithful Judaism actually required, right? And the same thing today. We're having the same discussions today. What does it actually take for you to be faithful toward Yahweh Shema Shai? What is his name? What are the customs that we can and can't follow? There's the most recent dispute that we have now is can you have sex on the Sabbath? And it's just completely, you know, for an individual to say you can and argue semantics behind why you can or can't, and then we're not going to put that burden on you. It's just, you know, it's bullshit. So anyways, you're having the same exact things reincarnate, or the same exact disputes reincarnate into a new empire. All right. Now it says the really interesting part. The Romans weren't Antioch or Antiochus, right? It says this distinction matters. Rome generally did not try to eliminate Judaism in the way Antioch's persecution is described, right? And this is exactly what I mean. So they're not trying to destroy us like physically yet, but socially they are trying to destroy us in a sense of, you know, demonizing what they call BHI, right? It says, in fact, Rome often permitted Jews to maintain distinctive religious practices because the Romans understood that different peoples had different ancestral customs, right? And that's where you got this homogenization of all these customs in one place, i.e. Babylon the Great, okay? Or Virgin Daughter Babylon, the same exact shit. The problem was that Roman political authority eventually collided with Jewish ideas about God's sovereignty, the temple purity, taxation, kingship, and foreign rule. And it's the same exact thing that we're having today, okay? Now, again, we considerably would be a portion of quote unquote Gentiles, because we're in a foreign land. We came here, we thought we were American. We all have social security cards. All right, we all were called by our names in this world, the governmental names, opposed to who we actually are. And we were all told that we were black. So it's the same concept of you being a fucking Greek. It's just different terminology. Okay, or you being a Gentile, it's just different terminology. To call someone American is to also call them a Gentile. If a dude comes up to you and he says that I'm either black or he's American, in other words, he's calling himself a Gentile. Okay, and then we'll classify him. Oh, okay, do you see your father on the sign? Or your father's ethnicity on the sign? And then he might identify, yeah, I'm Issachar, I'm so on and so forth. Then that's when he identifies himself as a Jew. Okay, but again, all this history matters because these same disputes were going on back then. And again, because of what happened during the Grecian Empire, it affected the terminology of individuals who, just like how these different classifications were, you know, individuals who were practical in the law and individuals who were okay with the Greco-Roman integration of lifestyle and practical customs and so on and so forth, right? Now, the reason why this matters is because that's what formulated a Gentile or a quote unquote foreigner, all right? Just like, and again, You got to understand that these individuals were very technical. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, these people that played these high positions were very technical when it pertained to the law. And that's why they kept trying to catch Yahweh Shai and something that, and portions of the law. Like the question about, oh, if a man had a wife, and the law about him having to, if he dies, he's supposed to pass it on to his brother. What if all his brothers die in the regeneration? Who would the woman's wife, who would the woman belong to? You know, if she slept with all of his brothers to have a child, to bear a child. And again, technical things like that. Yahweh Shai, he didn't answer in a technical way, he answered in a spiritual way. But again, all this matters because these technical individuals created, there was a distinction between these individuals who practiced the law and these individuals who were Hellenized. And a very, very roundabout long way in explaining it. So I'm gonna finish off what it says. It says, that produced an explosive situation. For example, the Roman presence itself raised questions like, if God is the true king of Israel, how can Israel legitimately be ruled by pagans? Some Jews could live with Roman rule pragmatically. Others consider it intolerable, like us, you know. But we're not. It's not intolerable to the point to where we're going to do things that are not coherent with what we're supposed to be doing prophetically. So it says, and it helps explain the world of Yahweh Shai. By the 1st century CE, the old Maccabean question had evolved into something broader. How should Jews remain faithful to the Most High while living in a heavily Hellenized and Romanized world, right? It says that question is everywhere in the New Testament. It says you can see it in disputes over the Sabbath, purity, food, circumcision, temple practices, paying taxes to Caesar, association with quote unquote Gentiles. It says Jewish leadership, Roman occupation, the meaning of the Messiah. So when you read the Gospels and Acts, you're entering a Jewish society that had been debating these questions for centuries. One important correction to the way we might frame it, it would be misleading to imagine two permanent Jewish camps, the Jews who obeyed the Torah versus the Jews who abandoned the Torah, right? Because it's way more complex than that. But the fact of the matter is that when you're out in the highways, we're not going to be able to explain all the intricacies behind the complexities that came from individuals who believed or who followed after the laws of our fathers and individuals who didn't during the times of the Grecian dominion, and how that affected Roman dominion, and how that affected us, and how that affected our customs, and so on and so forth. It's just so much complexity to it. So to make a very abridged, or to keep it very abridged, the distinction between a Hellenized Israelite and an Israelite that wasn't Hellenized, or that kept the customs of their father and had passed on traditions from the Grecian, Maccabean, Hasmonean and Grecian, Maccabean revolt, would be a Jew, quote unquote Jew, and then you had also a Gentile or a Greek. Okay, you could even say a Roman Grecian or a Grecian Roman. You know, it's the same thing. You know, they were Grecians. They act like Grecians. They act like Romans. Okay, which Rome and Greece also had customs to attach to their lifestyle, or to that culture, essentially, just like America does. This nigga's an American, you know, commits adultery, does all the things that Americans do. And that's just a very, you know, shortened version of the customs that came from, again, both of Rome, Greek, and even America. So anyways, it says, reality was much messier. A Jew could speak Greek, participate in Greco-Roman society, have a Roman citizenship, and still be deeply committed to Judaism. Likewise, Jews who considered themselves extremely faithful could disregard intensely with one another about what Torah actually required. Okay? It says, in fact, the latter rabbinic traditions itself emerged out of this environment of competing interpretations, right? And that's what it always is about. It's always about competing interpretations. And again, what we have isn't a private interpretation. It's an interpretation from the Heavenly Father. And furthermore, it's also the intent, because it's historically accurate. For you to just say that Gentiles are now, take that word, and now we're utilizing that word to allow other people who have not went through the things that we went through, and regarding what happened during the Grecian Empire or dominion, for you to then say that they are a part of that Gentile, but you're disregarding the fact that we were Hellenized, or even regarding the fact that we're Hellenized and playing on semantics of words to try to integrate the other nations in, it's just plain on disrespectful to the Heavenly Father, all right? But the words are set up like that purposely to the intent that those who will fall by the wayside will fall by the wayside. So it says, in fact, the latter rabbinic tradition itself emerged out of the environment of competing interpretations. So there's a fascinating historical progression. Persian Empire, Hellenistic cultural pressure, Maccabean conflict, which during the Hellenistic cultural pressure and the Maccabean conflict, that's what created a quote unquote Gentile in the New Testament. Okay. And it says the Hasmonean and Jewish kingdom, Roman dominion, which again created, this is when we had the term Gentile widely used to reference Israelites who were Hellenized. And it says, competing in Jewish interpretations, destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, and development of rabbinic Judaism, right? It says the Maccabean revolt was therefore not an isolated episode. It was part of a much longer struggle over Jewish identity, okay? And that's really what, it's all about. It's about who identifies as a Jew. And the reason why it matters who identifies as a Jew, because that's what's related to salvation. Now it says Torah foreign culture, political sovereignty, and how the Most High's people should live under an empire, right? So all of these things are congruent with identifying who salvation belongs to, and also who the term Gentile is referencing in context of whichever precept, especially when it regards to salvation. Okay, so having this historical understanding will cater to your understanding when it pertains to the placement of the word Gentile and what it's referencing in the context of that precept. I pray that this makes sense, and I also pray that you are edified through this epistle. With that, I give all praise, glory, and honor to Yahweh Ba'Shem Al-Shah, Ba'Shem Kakadash, Shani Kabah, Gawala Rakaz, Koyim Naba'ai, wa Shalom, wa Barakum, wa Bakan, Shasha. Until next time, I say Shalom.